to Biology Online. Today we'll be presenting a lesson on the cell cycle. So we'll be talking about division and growth specifically. We have 4 major goals. We're going to discuss reasons why cells might want to replicate. We're going to recognize that different types of cells will undergo their own unique method of replication. Specifically, we'll talk about the purpose and importance of each of these methods. And 3, we'll discuss or understand that there are some pretty important preparations that must happen before a cell can replicate. And with that, number 4, we're going to consider how DNA is going to kind of arrange itself in order to be able to be passed on to the new cells appropriately. So the purpose of cell replication or the cell cycle is, as we can see here, is to reproduce new organisms. We can see that right here. So that's what we usually think about when we think about reproduction. And so we have 2 individuals. Their egg and their sperm will fuse to produce one combined cell. And then from here, we need to make a whole bunch of cells in order to be a really large multi-celled organism such as you and I. And so with that, we're going to replicate our cells, and then we can see that the cells become different. So we also need to differentiate a little bit so that way we're not just a blob of cells, but we have like unique muscle cells and nerve cells and lung cells and so on. In addition to making new cells for new individuals, we also need to prepare any of those cells that have died. As we can see with this wound, our skin cells will replicate more skin cells to replace the ones that have gotten damaged. So who exactly replicates? Well, according to the 7 characteristics of life, composed of cells, take in nutrients, have heredity, such as DNA, undergo metabolism in order to utilize all that great energy that we take in, we also need to grow and reproduce. So as part of that rule of what characterizes us as being living, all living things will reproduce. Okay? So this would include organisms like plants, animals such as insects, humans, and the like, fungus like mushrooms and molds and mildew, as well as those little microbes that we cannot see, such as bacteria and viruses. And so in this image, this blue purplish guy here, which is really tiny, this is super magnified, is a bacterial cell. And then in red are the viruses. But technically, viruses are a little weird. I include them here, but technically they're not capable of self-replication. They do need a host, and that's probably what's happening here is this virus is attacking its host in order to replicate. We will discuss that momentarily. All right, there are 3 major types of replication. We have mitosis, meiosis, and binary fission. In the next few slides, we're going to be discussing what each of those types of replication methods will provide for us, or why it would undergo those methods. And some honorable mentions would be the lytic and lysogenic replication, which is what we find in viruses. All right, so to begin with, we have what's known as mitosis. And so mitosis is used by all of the eukaryotic cells, which would include plants, animals, fungus, and we use mitosis for growth and development as well as replacement of damaged and dead cells. Now, some of the things to note here is that mitosis is considered asexual, meaning we do not need a partner for this. So this is making new cells for the individual. We're not making a whole other organism. What'll happen here is that we're going to replicate our DNA. And then from here, we divide up our DNA and we split it up into 2 daughter cells that are total clones of each other. They're completely identical, provided no mutations happen. Now, a couple things to note here. So we're going to divide once after we have duplicated the DNA. It's going to produce 2 daughter cells, and we're going to have a total of 2 sets of DNA in those daughter cells, which will look just like the parent cell, which is way up here, okay? The next type of replication is called meiosis or meiosis. And so this one is considered sexual replication because we require another partner in order to fertilize and procreate. So basically what we're doing is we're producing sperm and egg. So these cells are not going to provide new cells for the individual. they're going to produce a whole new other organism for us. So in order to do this, very similar to mitosis, we start out with our parent cell, which will duplicate its DNA. You can see how the DNA totally got duplicated here. And then we divide the DNA once, and then we divide the DNA twice, and we end up with half the original number. So instead of having here, for instance, 4 chromosomes, we end up with only 2 chromosomes in the daughter cells. So let's recap. It's for sexual reproduction. We're going to produce sperm and egg, also known as gametes. We divide twice. It's going to produce 4 daughter cells. Now here, the chromosome number is said to be haploid, meaning it only has 1 set of DNA. And another unique feature, because we only have 1 set, there's no way that they're going to be identical. Okay, and we'll talk more about some of that in more detail later when we get into it. I just want to go over the basics of these and the importance of these. Another type, or the third type of replication, is known as binary fission. So this is found in bacterial cells or prokaryotic cells only. It is asexual, and occasionally, very rarely, it could be sexual, in which 2 bacteria might get together and maybe they'll exchange a little bit of DNA, but they won't actually combine their DNA. They just might swap out a few little bits. Kind of like trading cards, I guess, right? But they're going to produce 2 daughter cells in the end. Their chromosome is only going to be haploid. So what's unique about, well, mostly haploid, what's unique about these bacterial cells is that bacteria, well, because they don't engage in sexual reproduction, meaning their cells are not fused together like a sperm and egg would be, they'll only have the 1 set. Okay, and so once replication occurs and they divide their cells, so we can see here that we've got the DNA, clump of DNA that gets duplicated and then it's separated, and then we have 2 cells, and they are also genetically identical to each other. Again, unless there has been some sort of mutation. Now, this would be our honorable mention. So viruses, they actually cannot self-replicate. In fact, what they end up doing is they'll hijack the replication machinery that's found inside of their host. So they need a host, kind of like these little parasites, right? And so what we see here in viruses that will utilize an animal host, they will infect their host, and then they will release all of their little DNA. So they're coated in this little capsule that kind of protects them from the host. Then once inside the host, they'll release their genetic material. Usually it's in the form of RNA. And then that RNA will get inserted into the host's DNA, and then the host will actually produce new viruses inside of the cell, and then the new viruses will just simply leave the host cell. Okay, it's almost like the host becomes a little virus factory, pumping out more and more viruses, which will then in turn, here's that cyclical part, that cycle, it'll infect new host cells. Now, some other types found in bacterial hosts would be what's known as lytic cycle, and this will occur when the virus will infect its host, and then it will basically mass produce itself, and then it will, in the end, will destroy the cell. Like the entire bacteria just kind of bursts open, right? So it does this thing called lysis, which is to burst open or split open. The lysogenic cycle, however, is interesting. So the virus will put its genetic material into the host. That genetic material goes into the DNA. Then the host, the bacteria, will just replicate like it normally would, and it'll just keep doing that, just normal. So the virus genetic material kind of lays dormant, and then during any kind of stressful situation, that virus DNA will actually kind of come out of the host DNA, and then it'll produce a bunch of little viruses inside, and then kind of like the lytic cycle, it will burst out when it's ready to release itself, because the host is no longer such a great host, because it's probably a stressful environment. Okay, so now let's do a quick little check-in.